So guys, hello and welcome to a very, very special video with an incredibly special guest whose work I've been following for the past 7 years. Someone who is responsible for wonderful video game series like the Games Dungeon, comedy series Freeman's Mind, and also just spearheading one of the, if not the biggest pro-consumer rights movement in video gaming history, and one of the biggest when it comes to pro-consumer rights in general. I would like to introduce you to and also welcome Ross Scott. Ross, how are you holding up?
Oh, thanks. I'm doing okay, I guess.
I mean, we're all rooting for you and appreciating the hard work you're putting into this, but thank you so much for giving this complete stranger a shot and finding the time in your busy schedule to have a talk about
You
this.
say that it's like it was like this gigantic sacrifice. I mean, it's fine.
Look, if I was doing my...
I mean, the campaign is, but just coming here talking to you, I mean.
It's probably a 30th, if not more time you're doing this, so that accumulated must feel like a big sacrifice by now.
It's like a haze. It's fine.
Gotcha.
This will blur together with all the other
Understood.
memories.
And really, for anyone who maybe has not heard about your work, because the YouTube algorithm works in mysterious ways, could you maybe introduce yourself in regards to, why you even started creating content on YouTube and how you came up with the idea of voicing the inner thoughts of gaming's one of the most famous silent protagonists of gaming, and how you came to the idea of just creating a review/playthrough series like the Games Dungeon?
Yeah, so I guess before all this, and what I hope to get back to, I kind of stumbled into YouTube making various comedy videos, usually game related. And the one that really took off was one called Freeman's Mind, which I took the game of Half-Life, which is Gordon Freeman, one of the most famous silent protagonists in gaming. I just tried to fill in every thought in his head to just make it interesting and kind of funny. I did that actually as a response to a previous series I was doing, I might get back to eventually, called Civil Protection, where I animated characters in the Source engine for Half-Life 2 and made 3D animated shorts. But the thing is, I kind of hate animating. I mean, I love the results, but it's just so time consuming. So I wanted to see if I could get something out faster, and that's what Freeman's Mind was, just a runaway experiment. It's probably become the most popular thing I'll do. And then later, another series I sort of experimented with was, Ross's Game Dungeon, where I'm still not even sure what to call it now, but it's a sort of review show, but it's also just kind of going through various games, and sometimes it's a little bit like a review, other times it's just almost like a free-form thought train of what's going through my head while I'm going through it, and it's done okay. I guess the inspiration for that was I'm a fan of the old Angry Video Game Nerd episodes, and I really loved his atmosphere when, it feels like you're just sitting down on the couch with him and he's talking about how awful this game is getting animated, and I knew I didn't really have that same kind of consistent anger in me, but my mind could go to all kinds of different places, and there were some games I would run into that I had seen no one talk about that I would showcase, and or there'd be other games a lot of people knew about, but I would have thoughts just nobody else had mentioned, that sort of thing. So it's something I enjoy doing and want to keep making more of. This whole thing with the campaign has been a detour from all of this. So.
Gotcha. And what I appreciated especially about your Game Dungeon series is that, like you said, you pick really obscure titles that people might not have heard about. And really what hit me right in the feels was you covering Black Mirror, because it's one of my most favorite adventure series.
It really came together, yeah.
Exactly. And last Christmas you gave us a gift in terms of covering Gothic, which... one of the...
Well, that one's not so obscure. Sometimes they're
in
obscure.
US, I feel it is. In Europe, not at all. In Europe, it's very big. Yeah. It's what it feels like. And to hear someone from US covering Gothic was just incredible acknowledgement, especially with the upcoming remake on the horizon.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Awesome. And kind of, at least for me, watching your content for years, what was a big pivot for in terms of opening my eyes was your video covering the many issues with the way games as a service are handled via publishers and intellectual property owners, and that they are fundamentally built around the kill switch. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's one of the first time where you mentioned that your name is Ross and you like owning things.
Oh yeah, it might be. That's the sort of thing I kind of take for granted, though. You know, for if you buy food at the grocery, you just assume it's yours after that point. But yeah, so I guess that's why you're talking to me now, is as a detour from all this stuff that I didn't really want to do. The practice of games that require you to be online, I think the industry has been handling it in a completely negligent and reckless way, like 95% of the time or more, where there can be many reasons that a game might be online only for, you know, prevent piracy or have more control over the experience, that sort of thing. But what happens is so frequently is once the publisher is done supporting it, they decided they don't want to cover it any longer, they just shut it down, and everybody who bought that game is left with nothing. And this really runs contrary to a lot, and like compared to other products, to a lot of consumer law. And it's just always, I hated it because it just would destroy games. You know, lots of old games, it can be a lot of work to get them running again, especially on modern systems. But that's normal, you know, as technology evolves and moves on. If you throw enough time at it, you can usually get them working one way or another. But this, it just makes preservation impossible. And it sent me down a rabbit hole where I tried to find if there was a way to fight this. And it led to me discovering that the law on this was never actually settled in multiple countries. So I've been just trying to push this issue anywhere there's an opening on it, essentially.
And these were kind of the stepping stones for the later Stop Killing Games initiative, which I remember when it launched, and this was before even the European Citizens Initiative launched, when, man, you did an entire battle plan showing the map, the different countries, the research into the consumer law in different countries. And it was really interesting to see how essentially in countries like US, this was very difficult to do anything with, and it was a bit of a better and bigger shot in European Union to, for example, try and focus especially the initiative efforts there. But ultimately, you offered a way for everyone to voice their concerns when it comes to games just being run to the ground and never playable by anyone.
Well, almost everyone. Unfortunately, a lot of people are kind of powerless on. It was kind of a convoluted approach because we had to just go where the openings were on this. So Stop Killing Games is a campaign, again, trying to fight this. Most of what we've done is underway, but the two general approaches we had are one, there was a big prominent game being shut down by Ubisoft, which is located in France, which means it's subject to EU directives and French consumer laws, which are much more powerful than many other countries.
And they shut down The Crew.
The Crew. And that, at least at one point, had at least 12 million owners. So that meant there were still a lot of people who still had receipts from it lying around and they could prove their proof of ownership. So we used that to push that in multiple countries that had strong consumer laws and that might be able to decide if what's happening here is even legal or not. Because practice has never been tested in many countries on any real scale. The laws just weren't written for this kind of situation where they take it back from you. And we managed to escalate it in France, Germany, and Australia. So those are kind of our three chances going that route. But at the same time, since I was just trying to stop this any way I could and saw this as my only chance to really do so with the momentum, I looked into government petitions in multiple countries to try and propose new law for countries that didn't have very specific practices on this. We tried that in Australia, Canada, and then, geez, we did another one, but I'm trying to blank now.
Was it Brazil by any chance?
No, Brazil, we attempted trying to do a lawsuit, but we kind of hit a snap. Yeah, Brazil law is quite different, where a lawsuit is actually affordable there compared to the scale of this. But we hit a snag with that. Oh, yeah, the UK. That was, but that one's still ongoing, actually. If you're a UK citizen, you can, or resident, you can sign it. And the big one that we did that was it's more than a government petition is the European Citizens Initiative, which is a measure across EU countries for citizenry to bring forth, like if there's a problem, if they get enough signatures, they'll bring that before the EU Commission, and then they'll make a decision on how to solve it, or not if they decide. And that's the big one we're trying to push right now that's still ongoing and ends in a little over a month, July 31st. That one, I think, would actually really, if we can get past the signature limit, I have a lot of confidence that one's going to change practices in the industry for the better and start saving a lot of games. There's many details, but I don't want to take up all your time depending on what you want to cover. So.
No, man, I feel the same. Like, EU Citizens Initiative is the big one, and it's one of the reasons why this is such a time-sensitive video. Well, the reasons are two. One is the UK petition, which, if I'm not wrong, can be signed until 14th of July.
Yes.
And the EU Citizens Initiative, which is kind of the biggest hope for the Stop Killing Games movement, we have until 31st of July to get the required number of signatures and also pass the threshold in 7 countries.
Yeah, it's the reason, well, part of the reason I think it really could pass is because right now, like I mentioned, the law is undefined in many countries, and in the EU, where, like, for example, in some of the laws, they refer constantly to the duration of the contract. Well, it may be that a lot of these contracts, the part that states the duration is null and void because it violates another directive. So there is no duration of the contract. So this is already a mess. And our proposal is very much in line with consumer rights for other products. So it could be very good conditions for this to pass, is the way I would put it. So.
Now, we talked about what's our sort of best hopes and also the steps that led you to starting the Stop Killing Games movement, but maybe we currently have viewers right now watching who just have no bloody idea what is it we're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah,
what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And this is where I would like to talk about what the Stop Killing Games movement as a whole movement is, and equally important, what it isn't. Because historically, since it's launched, it led to some misinterpretations and misunderstandings, and we want to ensure that everyone knows exactly what they're signing. And sure. The way I would maybe like to just start is that the idea really is in many countries of the world, it's very difficult to protect games from essentially having the kill switch hit via using the existing law framework. And instead, what the initiative is trying to achieve, if I understood correctly, is propose a new law that would fit the intricacies of software, video game ownership, and honestly kind of remind people that end of user license agreement is not above the law. It is the other way around.
Yeah. I guess it's simple in concept, but there's probably 50 nuances to it, is the way to explain it. The core of what the initiative is asking is that when a publisher that sold a video game is done with it and they're ending support and shutting it down, they have to leave it in a state that the game is playable in some capacity that doesn't require a connection to them. Now, and a big aspect of this is the initiative is not retroactive. So if there's some games that they were never designed for this, it's almost impossible to imagine to make fixed, they may not be salvageable.
It's called Stop Killing Games, not Resurrect Dead Games.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'd love to, but it couldn't be retroactive even if we wanted it to. That's not how the law for the initiatives works. But so say sometime in the future, if a publisher was designing a new game that before they even started coding anything, they'd have to realize, oh, wait a minute, if we're going to sell in the EU, which is a very large market, we need to have some sort of end of life build so that once we're done with this, we can release something for the customer that they can run it in some way. That's the core of it that we're asking for. Now, if we get the signatures and it goes to the commission, it's very probable more additions to it could emerge that are coming from the EU Commission after hearing the industry side or developer side or how many parties are involved with it. So it's not a fully established thing. The goal of it is to basically bring the problem forward to the EU Commission and try to get a resolution that's satisfactory to it.
Understood. And we care very deeply about preserving video games because we do consider them as a form of art, the most interactive form of art, actually. And we care essentially what comes after we are long gone. We would love people centuries from now on to be able to play video games from the 20th or 21st century and dig into the history of how they have evolved into whatever the hell they'll look like in augmented virtual / alternate reality. But the thing is also, it's equally important to explain what the Stop Killing Games movement isn't trying to do. And actually, you've already started this topic. And you mentioned something interesting, that it's mostly about trying to preserve the future games being made or that are about to be made, so that when the whole process of development starts, they can be designed with an end-of-life plan in mind. And this is, on some very small scale, done already by a few passionate developers, but we need this to be done on the massive scale. On an industry-wide scale. And
well, actually, it's a little more mixed than that, because the majority of video games are already compliant. You know, you hear about studios shutting down all the time. Well, as long as the game's still playable after the fact, after the studio's gone, this would have no impact because it's already compliant. It's the specific kinds of games that are designed to connect to the publisher, which is frequently known as games as a service or live service games. Those in particular are the worst offenders of this. So, but yes, out of those games, a few publishers or developers handle shutdowns responsibly. I think one not too long ago was Knockout City, where they had to shut down the game, but then they patched it at the end to allow a private server so people could connect. And now the developers aren't involved in the game at all, but it's still playable, you know.
Exactly. And actually, now that you reframed it nicely, and I think another important debate that we should address is that shortly after the whole movement started, people started interpreting as somehow single player versus online games or things like that. And it's, I think, important to mention that the initiative doesn't really make that distinction as long as a game is playable.
Yeah, I could go over some of the common misconceptions I've seen. That's one of them. I almost want to call that gamer brain, because many gamers are used to thinking that, like, okay, so single player we have to save, but okay, multiplayer, that goes down and you lose it. But it's not always been that way. And there's many exceptions to that. Even now, I think like what, the Baldur's Gate 3 has multiplayer, and that's Larian could go under. I think you could still continue playing it. So, but that's the thing. The single player versus multiplayer distinction, that's almost like a gamer culture interpretation of it, because there's nothing in the law that I'm aware of that has separate laws for multiplayer versus single player games. The law cares about how the games are sold. What are sometimes in some cases, what are the terms on the license agreements? That's another misconception that we get, is that, well, this isn't possible because the license agreements say you can't do this. Well, license agreements can't override consumer law in the EU. So if there's a conflicting term, whatever the law says is going to be what's applicable. The biggest misconception we get is that we're asking developers to support the games indefinitely. And again, no, we've never asked that. What we would be requiring is that end of life plan that allows it to be shut down in some way, but people can continue playing. And actually, in the initiative, we've worded it so that there's actually some leeway to there's some room for interpretation, because some features really aren't going to be possible if the developer is no longer involved, like admins and moderators moderating. That takes real people doing something.
Anti-cheat and things like that.
Yeah, or matchmaking, or managed economy in a game. So we're leaving some room there. We say a reasonably playable or functional state, so that this isn't an impossible ask for publishers, and it gives them more flexibility. Another misconception that happens sometimes is that we're asking, this isn't possible because we would be asking publishers or developers to give up their intellectual property. And this one gets a little complicated, but we wouldn't, because for two reasons. One, we're only asking for what was already sold to them, essentially, which is the limited use, the limited rights in order to continue playing the game. The change that we're making is that the publisher couldn't just revoke that for no reason.
They never sold the intellectual property. They just sold the license.
Yeah, exactly. When you buy Grand Theft Auto, you were not buying the rights to the Grand Theft Auto franchise. You were buying a limited instance of the copy of it that you can play. That's all.
NFTs that claim otherwise.
yeah. So so there's that level of not giving away the intellectual property. But another level is that I have my train of thought here. Okay, so yeah, they buy it. Sorry, this happens, especially when it's hot.
No, that's fine. I feel you.
No, I got it. It'll come back to me in a second.
What popped into my mind in the meantime was, it will come back to you, is also there's a misconception that Stop Killing Games is somehow against the creation of live service games, which couldn't be further away from the truth.
It's the exact opposite, yes.
You want to preserve them in some accessible, playable state.
That's actually one of the other aspects of the flexibility, is nothing about what we're asking for would interfere with any practice that the game wants to have with the publisher until they're done with it. So they could still monetize it as normal. They could, have DLC, microtransactions. It could remain always online as long as they're supporting it. It's just that they would need to have some end-of-life plan for it. And I think I remembered what I was going to say with the not giving away their intellectual property. So one aspect of it is we're just basically, users would be able to keep what they already bought, and it would still, I guess, they wouldn't be able to take it back without cause, because if there was, well, that's part that might get debated in the EU Commission, but like, let's say somebody actually was trying to hack the servers and cheat and ruin everything. Well, that's taking away the game with cause, the behavior of the player. That wouldn't be forbidden, I don't think, but that would be the EU Commission's decision. We would be fine with it either way. But the other aspect is the initiative focuses on the outcome, which is a working game, which essentially what they were sold. While we have suggestions, nothing about it is mandating the exact way that outcome is achieved. So it is not saying, oh, you must release the source code at the end of life, or you must release server binaries, or you must because if we were to do that, that actually could run afoul of some copyright laws, because now we're demanding their intellectual property. And even though the outcome is extremely similar, by focusing on just the outcome, just in a working state, that gets around it. An analogy I make is, if there's a stop sign, you're required to bring your car to a stop. It's not telling you have to use the regular brakes or the handbrakes or just coast to a stop. That's your interpretation. But so there is a requirement to be met, but it's not mandating any specific intellectual property in the process.
Gotcha. And that's where I believe the vagueness in some statements in the initiative, it's intentional, strategic, and it does and phrases things in good faith for the intellectual property holders and publishers that they'll do a reasonable effort. There are some places where law meets common sense. This is the case also in police work and elsewhere, and this is one of those cases, if I understand it correctly.
Yes, and I wouldn't even call it vagueness, because vague means you're not sure about this. Broad
Gotcha.
is a better term for
Broad,
what
yeah.
it's asking. Because, yeah, okay, this says this. It's what I'm more familiar with, but an example in American law is police can stop a suspect if they have reasonable suspicion that something illegal or there's a problem is going on. Or in court, you know, a jury finds someone guilty beyond all reasonable doubts. So, you know, you can, it doesn't allow for like nonsensical interpretations, but, you know, based on the evidence, that sort of thing. And these are common legal proceedings. So that's kind of what we're aiming for with the initiative. But the other aspect of it is this isn't even a proposed bill. It functions more like a negotiation where, you know, we bring forth our problem to the EU Commission. The industry, of course, is going to be against whatever we write and say they don't need regulation. Then the EU Commission looks at it and kind of decides, okay, well, should we compromise, or is this side more right than the other, and that sort of thing. So being very simple and to the point is beneficial, because say we listed 10 minute details to it that we wanted. Well, then they can maybe pick one they like and ignore the other 9, and that might weaken our stance. It kind of weakens our position on that. So the nuances of it and the specific laws absolutely get worked out later in the process with the EU Commission overseeing everything.
This is a movement. This is an initiative. It is not exactly a proposed bill. None of us here are, at least as far as I know, lawmakers or anything like that. And this is exactly up to the lawmakers to negotiate with the industry. But the reality is that if nothing happens, then games will keep being designed around kill switches, essentially, once they are deemed no longer profitable. And since at least those of us who see them more as more than products, but more as works of art and want them preserved, if this movement achieves its mission, then future games will be designed back in sort of the draft stage regarding third-party software and microservices around the fact that, oh, hold on a sec, we actually need to also already start keeping in mind some kind of end-of-life plan.
Yeah, and actually you brought up a couple distinctions there people might jump to, since you mentioned like microservices or microtransactions. This actually would cover games with microtransactions, because the idea is, let's say you have a free game, but you can buy skins for it, or, you know, account features, that sort of thing. Well, you may not be entitled to the game directly because it is free. However, if that microtransaction depends on that game in order to work, and it doesn't have an expiration date, then you are entitled to the microtransaction. It's the law. Best I can tell, there's almost no distinction between that and a game that requires a company server to run, because they're both something that's sold similar to a good, but rely on an external service. And that's actually another important distinction. We're going to try, but probably fail, even if we get the signatures, to protect games with subscription fees. The reason we'll probably fail is because the laws on that are much more clearly defined. Because if you were to pay for a month of access at World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14, they tell you exactly when your access ends.
You
know,
get
30
exactly
days.
what you pay for, yeah?
Yeah, and that's kind of how almost all services work. So under consumer law, this is very clearly a service. You know, this is not, even though we consider it art and something to be preserved, consumer law isn't going to come to the rescue to us for that. So our only argument for that would be kind of cultural preservation. And unfortunately, those laws are much weaker. So we might lose on that. However, there's not that many games that do that now. I think it's maybe 13 total that I'm aware of, and some of them are hazier than others. Like I mentioned, Final Fantasy 14 and World of Warcraft or some. So whereas the number of games that are kind of shut down permanently, they're hundreds. So, you know, if that's a compromise we could live with. And well, we wouldn't have a choice actually. But if we're only losing 1% of the games we're currently losing now, that's an enormous victory. Another type of game that would not affect are completely free games. So if there's just no, I think Realm of the Mad God is an example of that. Well, there's no commerce going on. So, and if it's completely free, I think that'd be kind of overreach to put restrictions on a person if they just want to experiment and that sort of thing. It's only once money starts being exchanged that it really comes into play.
And kind of the original kick in the pants of the initiative when games we paid for started being killed and sunset and that sort of thing. And actually, I do have one example in mind exactly of a game like that, which also included some microtransactions. And, well, it was never really refunded. But first of all, I would like to mention maybe an example of preservation done right, and then to contrast with that preservation done poorly, as in a game actually killed.
Many examples of the latter.
Yeah, and so first of all, Ross, just like you, I like owning things, especially so since I come from a post-Soviet country where property was considered a crime and a cause for imprisonment. Yeah, it belongs to the people, exactly.
It's a people's game, yeah.
Yeah, and really, one of the examples I would like to show is, and for viewers of my channel, it's not going to be a surprise, but over here I have a CD of a later but still valid PC release of Tomb Raider 1, the original one. I have a copy of Tomb Raider 2 from 1997 and Tomb Raider 3 from 1998. Each of these jewel cases contains a CD I can put into the disk drive install, and they are even on Windows 11 in a playable state, albeit I'll need to do some widescreen patching because of their age. Now, what has happened was very exciting for me in the last year and a half was the announcement and release of Tomb Raider 1 to 3 Remastered, followed by 4, 5, 6 Remastered. And this entire project has done remarkable things for preservation. They kept the original graphics going on, including the new graphics. And the good thing is they also cared to do physical releases, so I can whenever just pop in this disc into my PlayStation 5, install it, and play it. Should there be no available online services, it will have the unfortunate effect of me no longer being able to download the most recent patch, which was released after the physical release of the game. But the games are all still in a playable state. And the initiative is not asking for a playable state of every single patch and version of a game or anything like that. That would be 3,000 World of Warcraft builds then. But what I also appreciate about it is that no one can, with this disc, legally break into my apartment and destroy it and say, well, you signed a clause in the end of user license agreement that will be able to destroy it. Tough luck. If that was the case, all I would be left with would be Tomb Raider trading card game, essentially. And the reason why I'm bringing trading card games, I'm a big fan of Magic the Gathering. I do consider the artworks on these cards works of art. Some of these in this deck are from 1990s, some of them are so old I wasn't even born yet. And the good thing is that, again, when some of these I purchased, some of these I traded, none of these are tied to any EULA saying that anyone can walk up to me and not even steal them, destroy them, so that no one can ever play with them again, because these old cards are no longer deemed profitable and are in print. And this is where this kind of physical world meets the digital world, and it's a game that you also mentioned on your discussion with Josh Strife Says, and that's Battleforge. This, for people who are not familiar, is a real-time strategy game from 2009, and it has a lot in common with Magic the Gathering. You build armies via collecting cards. There was an entire economy online where you could trade with people, you could buy booster packs, you could play the game to earn more and build your armies. Now, I have very fond memories of this game from 2009. My brother, on the other hand, he's the one who purchased it, and he's the one who bought, actually, multiple copies, because when these were discounted, he could get points to buy booster packs in a better way than via dedicated booster pack boxes. And he spent a lot of time in this game, has lots of fond memories, but also a lot of money. And on September 4th, 2013, an announcement came that the game's online services will be shut down, which on its own would be fine. You'd think you can still play in single player, but that's not how Battleforge was designed. On 31st October 2013, so roughly 4 years after its release, when online services were disconnected, all anyone with any kind of disc in their hands could do would be to install the game, boot up the main menu, and listen to the main menu theme. But they would never be able to play a single session. No matter.
I don't think you even got the main menu. You just got a login screen.
Oh, login screen before the main menu even. Wonderful. So yeah, maybe some old archived YouTube footage then. But this is kind of what we mean by stopping to kill games. Battleforge was a game designed from the get-go with a kill switch in mind the moment it ceases to become profitable. And my brother's entire card collection in that game just disappeared up in smokes, and he doesn't get to relive those memories. And what the initiative is trying to do is to ensure that, given a new bill of law in the future negotiated by lawmakers and the industry, the best effort would be made via publishers and IP holders to design future games with some end-of-life support in mind. So in case of Battleforge, in a better future, what that would look like would be, we're announcing we're shutting down online services, trading will not be possible, multiplayer games will not be possible, but you'll still be able to at least play the campaign on your own.
Well, actually, we're aiming even higher than that, because trading might not be possible, but if the game was advertised as having multiplayer, play with your friends or online, that would be a requirement. I don't think if you only have the single player of a game that had both and they advertised multiplayer functionality and it wasn't just like a bonus feature added later or something, then there would be requirement for that too, which would necessitate private servers. So under the initiative, I'm not sure that would meet the reasonably playable state, because let's say you bought it for the multiplayer, you didn't care that much about the single player. Well, then now for you, that game's still effectively gone. So, but this is not arcane technology either. I mean, that used to be how almost every multiplayer game that you bought worked, that you could host the game and connect to someone else and connect to you. Now, many games that may not be practical or even possible for, because now the server they're meant to connect to is very specialized hardware, doesn't even resemble a consumer machine or that sort of thing. But in that case, in order to fulfill the requirement, again, we're not specifically saying this, but I think in real world terms, I think the publisher would have to release some form of that server software that was designed for the other system and let the customer know, okay, our end of life plan requires, the server rack if you want to be able to run it, and which I think the community would figure it out if there's a fan base for that game to get it running again. So there was another thought I had when you were talking about magic cards. At least with magic cards, those are physical things they have to print. Those take real resources if they want to have more of them. Whereas, I mean, games, they're data. They can be copied an infinite number of times. So it's kind of more insulting when, we can't keep that in some fashion. And another misconception is people might say, like, oh, well, they can't give this away because they have all these license agreements with other companies, so they don't have permission to distribute that. Once again, that's why it's not retroactive, and this would be in the future, so they would have to work out those deals right at the beginning to allow this, and not have to say, oh, we can't do anything at the end when the law has changed.
I feel like maybe a good example of when there's an issue with licensing with other companies could be, I think GTA re-releases were done like this. Even Mafia 3 Definitive Edition was released with some missing tracks because the licensing for that music has expired in the meantime since its launch in 2016. But it wasn't a reason to just not distribute the game anymore, right? So clearly this can be done.
for stuff like that with copyrighted music or for racing games have car brands that have expire. I've never heard of that. I've only ever heard of that prohibiting the publisher from selling more copies past a certain date. I've never heard of it meaning that the customer is no longer allowed to run the game. I mean, if you have an old, like you mentioned, Grand Theft Auto, okay, fine, let's say you have an old disc of it. It still runs. You can still hear the old music that was included in it, even if they may not have, even if Rockstar may not have the rights to resell it with that music. So that's kind of a false approach to it. You know, that's another thing. Sometimes, more rarely, but let's say there's a game once it shuts down. It say runs on Windows 10, but then, you know, there's a new update to Windows 11, and now that game no longer runs. Well, that's on the customer then. That they would have to figure out how to keep it running or that sort of thing. So we're not asking,
yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't be asking the publisher to just keep updating things. They could really end support in all ways.
The initiative is not called Keep Supporting Games Forever. It's just
Correct.
to please stop killing them and really to design future games without the kill switch in mind and instead replace it with an end-of-life support. That's essentially it. So guys, if really video game preservation is important to you and you'd like the discussion to be taken seriously across the globe with lawmakers and essentially kickstart the negotiation between the industry and lawmakers, then Ross, what is it that people can still do today to support the initiative?
I guess we have things already in action, so it could be we're just going overkill, which I hope is what's happening.
Never hurts.
But the best thing we can do to influence this, like if you really want to make this happen, the European Citizens Initiative is the most powerful option. But you do have to be an EU citizen. You don't have to live in the EU, though. So if you're living abroad, that still counts. And the citizens of an EU country. And anyone who is available to sign. So you can have a relative or a girlfriend or something sign also if you can talk them into it, or a friend. If we can get enough signatures for that, I think it's going to change gaming history. And this is going... One analogy I make is people might forget now, but it used to be when you bought a game on Steam or something, you couldn't refund it. You know, if you decided, oh, wait, no, this doesn't run on my system, or, oh, I don't like this. You know, you play 5 minutes and like, the reason that changed is because Australia sued Valve over not allowing refunds. Valve lost. Then afterwards, instead of just allowing refunds for people in Australia, they decided to just make it global because they didn't want to have to deal with this country by country. And actually, that's why I think this is really going to end this, because if companies want to sell games in the EU and they know they have to have end-of-life plans, well, once they shut it down, they'll probably just decide to roll it out globally because they've already done the work. And that would be better PR for them than just only having it in France or Germany or something, and everybody else can never play the game again.
Region locking is additional workload and cost on their part. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's about trying to get that minimum effort in there. And I really think the Citizens Initiative is the number one thing you can do. If we pass 1 million signatures, I think we're really going to end this. And you'll start, imagine the future not even having to think about whether you get to keep the game or not, and you just decide if that's the game you like or not, which is how it should be in my eyes.
Exactly. And vast majority of the viewers of my channel, according to YouTube stats, are in US, but some of them maybe do have EU citizenship just because they're watching from US. And also people in UK are big on my channel. And if I'm not mistaken, they can sign the UK petition, right?
The odds are worse of a success in UK. UK is iffier, I will say, but if we can pass 100,000 signatures in the UK, I think we're at 30,000. It will be brought before Parliament to be considered for debate. And without getting into all the details, there are some aspects of UK law that don't quite line up with this practice, specifically how they don't tell you when your game is going to end. Mm-hmm. So there might be an opening there too, but it's less well, you don't get to choose where your
citizenship is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you're in the UK, by all means, sign it, even if our odds are rougher for that. But we do have a chance there.
Awesome. So really, Ross, you mentioned in your video from earlier this week, which actually really helped kickstart another second breath for the European Citizens Initiative, that in many ways this situation we find ourselves in with games being killed, and also you not really thinking of yourself as the best person to spearhead the movement, but the only person spearheading the movement, that in many ways we are now living in the, not in the worst timeline, but the stupidest timeline, which made me giggle when you said that.
Yeah.
And it really is interesting, because even in the stupidest timeline, we are still at a crossroads, right? We have for UK Petition half a month, for EU Citizens Initiative a full month of time. And based on people's activity and the number of signatures and efforts of the whole movement and the rest of us, we can go really just either one of two ways. And first, let's be very optimistic. Let's say that the biggest shot, the EU Citizens Initiative, passes within the month of July. We'll make it. What should we then expect? What are the next step in this better alternate timeline?
Okay, if the initiative passes, and we get the signatures, the next step will be the official organizers, who are EU citizens, would travel to Brussels to discuss it with the EU Commission and clarify anything, lay out their case. From there, it kind of depends on how much the EU Commission wants to get involved. It could be that they'll have many questions for the organizers and lots of back and forth, or it could be they'll just look at all the arguments and then they'll essentially dictate how it's going to be. It's up to their discretion. Again, the reason I'm so optimistic of it is because this is just such a gap in the law already, and we're going to be shining a flashlight on it. And what we're asking for is quite reasonable for other consumer standards.
And the gap's been there for years and years and years.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so dumb. It's like this really should have been solved at least 15 years ago. That for how long this practice has been going on. I mean, Battleforge, you met 2009 and shut down 2013. So yeah. There could be compromises, but that's another reason that simplicity is a strength, because our whole purpose is we want the games to be playable. So if the compromise doesn't do that, I think the organizers would probably walk out on it, which would look very bad politically. This is, especially for the European Union, which wants to present itself as very pro-consumer, that all the organizers are well aware of all the dynamics of this and what the problem is. So I would trust any of them to handle this competently. This is kind of politically dangerous to not give us something substantial, is the way I would look at it. Because that would make much more than just gaming news. So it just, across you have no rights to ownership in the EU, or to be or if you're renting on a subscription, how long you get to keep it, But so there could be compromises. Some that come to mind are maybe we do lose on subscription titles. Another might be an which I don't think this one would be that bad. Would be, instead of saying that the game has to be in a working state, an acceptable alternative might be to release the equivalent of repair instructions. So say a company doesn't want to bother making an end-of-life build, but they say, hey, you know what? Here's the source code. We don't want to deal with it. That's more than enough to save a game. So that might be another option. Another might be for existing games, they get grandfathered in, which means if a game has been sold before that date, then they're exempt from the regulations, but every new game after that date would be subject to them to make it easier on the industry. Another might be developers or publishers below a certain size, if they're earning less than €1 million or something, then maybe they get exempt, depending on what. So there's some wiggle room that it might not save every last game, but I think we would see just enormous percentages of games starting to be preserved again.
Absolutely.
And past that, I'd say the fastest they would pass the end of the law might be 2 years, but it could be longer. But there would be light at the end of the tunnel from this.
Personally, I'm expecting half a decade as a EU citizen, but who knows? Might be pleasantly surprised. But yeah, exactly. Just to reiterate that this is really mostly focused on the future games that will be developed. Of course, the initiative will try to save as many existing games now that we love so much, if at all possible. And also, this is huge, not just in case you love video games, but for pro-consumer rights in general. My girlfriend, who doesn't play video games, she's been one of the first to just start using her Instagram to promote the initiative and so on when EU Citizens Initiative went live. And because she has many friends in the art circles, and they do understand how important this is. So again, for anyone watching, even if you're not a gamer, please consider what precedents this might set for other industries and other things you love about art for the future. And
yeah, it's possible. It won't be me, but it's possible if we do have success, someone else comes forward and uses this as a template that, hey, we need protections in some other products, like let's say educational tools or, medical devices, or something where this practice of just not giving you an expiration date, then taking it back at an undisclosed date is creeping into other areas. They could use this as a model for it to build off of other things.
Absolutely. And see, I didn't even think about the implications on medical devices and things like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So that in many ways, it's a bit of a social constructionism, the way we collectively decided to respect EULAs before the law, oftentimes.
I think it's more just it's kind of creeped in there and people didn't do anything.
Exactly. More of an apathy then, yeah. Exactly. Now, I think it's also equally important, and this was actually the original point why I reached out to you, Ross. And again, I really appreciate you for giving the time and coming on board. But after your video that you released earlier this week, where we had just a bit over 1 month left, and it seemed the signatures were barely going to reach maybe halfway point, and we're now way over half point since then. Thanks to coverage by some big YouTubers like Moist Critical, Mutahar from SomeOrdinaryGamers, Asmongold, and Josh Strife Says, my personal favorite. So what I'm wondering is, I originally wanted to discuss the future of the Stop Killing Games movement should especially the European Citizens Initiative end up being unsuccessful. And what I mean by unsuccessful is two things. It could either result in just a vast number of signatures missing and it never getting anywhere, or it could also mean that we will be missing maybe 5,000 signatures, just barely there. And
it's possible.
What I want to ask you, Ross, and I know you're not the authority to speak on how EU works, but since you've been in touch with some people who are the authority on this, should the petition just be shy away from a few votes from the million that we need to reach and a threshold of 7 countries reached, do you think there's any chance, any precedence for EU maybe picking this up nevertheless?
This is something I might have known the answer to a year ago, but I would assume no. However, that would be newsworthy in itself. That might have a beneficial effect more with the agencies where we're kind of pushing this issue elsewhere. But I think I think you should assume it won't be enough and they can dismiss it. But they might decide to look at it anyway, but I'm not certain of that. That again, I probably knew it a while back, but
you have
I would not assume things positively, I guess is the way.
Gotcha. To be a healthy skeptic.
For the initiative, the other action we have going on, that might still have a chance. It's a big unknown. If France decides, they look at this and they say, no, this is a violation of French law, then that could be a path to success that way. Just
like you said a few minutes ago, maybe the whole movement already in a way succeeded and we're just doing extra steps and we just don't know about it, right?
I would love for that to be the case. Yes,
Yeah,
it's possible.
that'd be amazing. But staying on the sort of healthy skepticism, what I'm thinking is, let's say this won't even be picked up by EU. The reason why I asked this was mostly because of the fact that this was top second or top third petition recently for the entire European Union. So at least it showed on the radar, in the very least, I imagine. And
oh yeah, it's never. I mean, after hitting that stage, I don't think it's ever dropped below the third most popular initiative.
which I don't know, Ross, how you felt about it when you started the movement, but did you ever imagine your initiative would get this many signatures?
It was a gigantic unknown to me. I could have seen it going either way. Like we get 50,000 or we get 800,000, or I really didn't know what to expect.
Gotcha. Well, the reason I'm asking this is, let's say, I think in this case, the worst case scenario is that none of the things that have already been put forth as part of the Stop Killing Games will ever make it. And let's say the biggest shot, the EU Citizens Initiative, will also be completely dropped and ignored because of an insufficient number of signatures.
So failure on all fronts.
Exactly. Well, let's assume failure on all fronts until proven otherwise. Do you think that what your movement essentially has achieved, and I remind everyone, this is really the first official attempt at this, and it's huge. Do you think this could somehow help someone else in the future pick this up and rebuild the momentum with even greater success?
I think it's possible. I'm not optimistic about it though, or at least not on a near-term scale, like maybe 20 years or something, once it becomes really obvious how many things are getting destroyed. Because I think, I mean, not to be too much of a downer, but I think for younger gamers especially, they've been kind of conditioned to accept this. And it's only people like your age or mine or older that kind of realize, well, no, this doesn't have to be like this at all, you know? So if that's all they know and they get kind of conditioned to it, that unfortunately can increase the apathy or just make this seem like something out of science fiction, you know, that to them. So I think we're kind of losing, without this, I think we could lose an awful lot of momentum that might not be recoverable, but I would love to be wrong. It's not a certainty in my mind. So.
Gotcha. And should someone relaunch the exact same EU Citizens Initiative word by word, is there some cooldown period that it cannot be relaunched for a couple of years?
I'm not sure. Well, okay, not that I'm aware of, but it would take months for them to process the new one, though. So you'd probably be looking at a lag time of at least 2 or 3 months. But yeah, I mean, they're welcome to take the exact same words if they want. I think the main obstacle would be just where do you find the signatures? Because I think a lot of people who signed once, I would expect maybe a third of them to sign again, and everybody else just like, I've already tried this, I'm giving up on it. So you would need lots of publicity to try to get to this stage again, I would think, much more than I was able to stir up. So.
Well, the kind of publicity that the movement's getting now, just later on launch.
Well, this is where it's. I'm not a large optimist, so I tend to just look where I think it might go, you know. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. But yeah, so guys, for those of you watching, I hope this kind of emphasizes how important it is to really take action now, as there might not be a second shot. And of course, we'll meet the initiative where it's at the end of July and essentially see if we were right or wrong regarding optimism or skepticism, essentially. But this is huge for gamers, non-gamers, and just customers and consumers alike. And if this passes in EU, it's going to send a ripple effect for the entire industry throughout the entire globe.
Yeah, and even if you can't sign, like you're American or Canadian or something, you're almost certainly going to get the benefits downstream from it. And so the best thing to do in that situation, let's say you don't know anyone from the EU, maybe tell streamers or YouTubers you do watch about it that might have an audience with more people from the EU. It's difficult, but word of mouth is...
It's powerful.
It's our best, yeah, it's our best shot.
And you don't get to see the effects immediately, but there are effects. Exactly. Awesome, Ross. Thank you so much. Really, I appreciate everything you did. I mean,
we'll see how much there is to actually thank me for. Yeah, the only thing we can promise is answers at the end. We'll get rid of that legal vagueness. We'll get rid of the real vagueness going on right now. So.
Look, this is, you don't strike me like the kind of person who enjoys hearing praise or anything like that, so I'm not gonna shover you with it. I'm just gonna state a fact. You've done more for making publishers and IP holders stopping killing games than anyone else right now.
Well, the only thing I think we can take tangible credit for is Ubisoft has announced they're going to have offline modes for
2 games, right?
The Crew Motorfest. They didn't say it, but it's according to an insider and just looking at it, it has to be in response to the initiative. So those weren't even ones we were aiming for, actually, but those games looks like they're going to survive. So that's something.
Absolutely. And, you know, for those of you guys who are undecided, please check the links in the description for exact wording what the initiative states. You know, maybe don't listen to anyone, not even us. Check it for yourself and find out if this is something you agree on. Even if maybe you have a couple of ideas on how this could be done better in the future, come join the Stop Killing Games Discord, share those ideas, but please support the initiative in its current form. The timing is everything right now. This is...
That's another thing. If there was a really great idea that we missed somehow, that could be relayed to the actual organizers when they do go to Brussels, because this is still has some malleability to it. You know?
Yeah, really, more than the exact form and the exact wording, the intention of what we're trying to do here should be what matters the most when you consider whether you're gonna give a signature or not. And if you have any questions that the links cannot provide an answer for, then people on the Discord community, which is absolutely massive, will. So Ross, thank you so much for finding the time, for talking through this again. And I know you've been living, breathing, and eating Stop Killing Games since the launch of the initiative. Yeah. What I really wish for you more than anything is after July to take a well-deserved vacation. That's really... I hope you'll be able to do that.
At some point.
No, man, this was awesome. Thank you again, and I'll be, again, just like before Stop Killing Games, I'll be on the lookout for your games dungeon, which I enjoy to no end. And yeah thanks again.
Fun videos on the horizon is what I want to get away from this once it's done.
Oh yeah, and again, you mentioned that leading the charge in this movement has been to great personal cost to you in terms of your savings, in terms of your channel performance.
Yeah. I mean, not like it's usually when somebody says that they're talking about like somebody's died. You know, it's not like that, but it's no. It's taken a toll on me. That's fair. Yeah.
What I'm really hoping for is that all the hard work you put into the movement is essentially gonna pay off as it pertains to your channel and your future endeavors, because the amount of experience you got here, that's gonna pull you through the rest of your life.
Well, what I get out of this is I won't have any nagging doubts after this.
Oh, yeah.
Even if we lose, like, okay, that's fate. So.
Exactly, a bit of stoicism there. And on that note, again, thank you, Ross, so much. Thank you to everyone for watching. Please, please, please sign the petition. If you have any suggestions on how to make it better, then please join the Discord, share them with us. And yeah, let's see how the entirety of July will develop. I'll be refreshing that Stop Killing Games page with bated breath every hour, it seems, and every time I wake up.
Okay, well, we'll see.
Indeed. Take care, Ross.
Thanks.
And on a final note, I'd like to say thanks to each and every one of you for watching today's video. I'm still amazed that Ross has found the time to come in and talk about Stop Killing Games, and I'm amazed that you guys have also been listening to this patiently. If you can tell, this is incredibly important for the future of all video games. Now, in case you still haven't made up your mind, please check all the links in the descriptions with an extensive FAQ section, and also feel free to join our Discord where any questions might be answered that you might still have, or also where you can propose some improvements to the overall initiative. And most importantly, please, whilst there's still time, sign the UK petition until July 14th and the European Citizens Initiative until July 31st. This is a very time-sensitive video. It's also one of the reasons why it had really minimum editing. I wanted to get it out as soon as possible. This is also where I would normally say thanks to my absolutely amazing patrons who have been financially supporting me so that I can afford to do this kind of work more often. However, in this particular video, I am not gonna mention my Patreons nor provide a link to my Patreon, and I want to explain why. This video is all about the Stop Killing Games initiative. If you do want to support me, please support the initiative depending on which region you have a citizenship in. I think it's very important to keep these kinds of things and initiatives separate from any kind of monetizations. Similar to my Extra Life annual charity streams, I also do not link them to my Patreon, and I also don't have them monetized, although if you know my channel, you know that all of my videos are demonetized. But this is just one extra step I want to ensure that me making this video is clearly done for the benefit of the initiative and not for my own personal gain. I hope that makes sense. And in case you're a Patreon and you're really disappointed in this, please drop me a message and I'll try to explain it the best way I can. And guys, we will be back to my usual videos, but what I just also want to point out is that during the time of me and Ross having this chat, look at the number of signatures in the UK petition. We've crossed 40k threshold, and also in the European Citizens Initiative, we are now past 600,000 signatures. This is absolutely amazing. When I reached out to Ross a couple of days ago, we were at 450. Let's keep the momentum going, and in case you cannot sign but know of people who can sign, you spreading the word forward would really help. Anywho, that's all from my side. Thank you for watching and for listening, and until I see all of you next time, I want to wish you happy gaming.